water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then everything changed when... Whoa. How many times do I have to tell you? We're doing a vaguely Avatar-esque build, not literally Avatar. Wait, we're not? What's with all this elemental stuff then, huh? Oh, come on, Avatar doesn't have a monopoly on elemental themes. In fantasy settings. Or Eastern-influenced fantasy settings. Wait, come to think of it. Anyways, let's just move on to the build. Hello and welcome back to another Zola's Minecraft time-lapse. Today I am building Zolazzar, God of the Elements. Now this is a character I've been brewing in my head for a little bit, and I'm glad I get to show you all this version. If you've been paying really close attention to my previous videos, you may know that I mentioned him in my Dejnala Oasis video. This is because Zolazzar is the patron god of the Oasis, a role he has held since before the rise of the fivefold pantheon. Because of this, he is somewhat distrustful of the younger gods. Like the other gods, however, he hasn't been seen in over 1,000 years, and many folk distrust that he even ever existed. Zolazzar's kin, the Jinn, are said to each hold a spark of his essence, and it is thought by some that should the Jinn unite, they could bring Zolazzar back from his exile. The concept of this character is one I've made a few years ago based on the idea of a four-armed Jinn who would wield the four elements, one in each hand. I also kind of wanted to do a build with elemental temples because the last time I did a build like that was about 8 years ago. That build is on my Planet Minecraft page. I would highly recommend not checking it out. Anyways, I'd like to think I've improved as a builder since then, at least a little. And with Zolazzar himself done quickly, I thought the temple should just be a piece of cake. Boy was I wrong. Each temple ended up taking several times as long as Zolazzar to build. I didn't know exactly what each temple was going to look like beforehand, so I started by setting up the expectation that there would be a few unifying elements between each temple, while also allowing each to be a distinct representation of their given element. The three main points of unity between the temples are, number 1, large domes, though of what shape is dependent on the temple. Number 2, fractal-like symmetry, in other words, smaller parts of the temples that mimic the whole. And number 3, radial symmetry, particularly by increments of 4 and 8. This can be seen in the repeating octagram star motif that is present throughout the temples. The first temple I work on is the Fire Temple. This temple was partially inspired by a build made by the YouTuber Toby1Kenobi, who was one of the first people I saw using World Edit way back in the day. His Fire Temple had these side towers connected to the main body by bridges, and I thought that was a really nice idea. I also think it somewhat resembles a blaze mob with its floating rods. Given that this is the Fire Temple, I'm sure to add some fiery details such as campfires, braziers on top of the domes, and streams of molten lava pouring down. Here I make that 8-pointed star I mentioned earlier. I will end up incorporating this into the other temples as well. I make some smaller dome towers coming off the top of the main body. I tried attaching them to the medium-sized towers, but after revolving it, I thought it made the temple look a little bit too bulky. And now the Fire Temple is done. Well, not quite. I will end up going back and retexturing the domes later with easy edits. Off camera, because of course I forgot to record parts of the process for some reason. Now I go to the center platform, which I had just made into a circle, with the mosaic tile pattern I had made for the Oasis build pasted on it. I then had the idea that I could shape the platform based on the lines of the pattern. From there I made the star pattern and made some borders with placeholder blocks. I then made 3 levels of elevation for the platform. Like the palace in my Oasis build, this platform was inspired by the concept of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now we move on to the Earth Temple. This temple's shape was partially inspired by the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. I also took a little inspiration from Jabba the Hutt's palace from Star Wars. I make some small towers to go in the corners. These will house staircases that will ascend from the central area of the temple to the upper domes. To represent the element of earth, I chose to make this temple the most solid-looking structure. I make the entrances to this temple angular diamond-shaped doorways. Now I start the most dreaded of building processes, the interior. I continue the diamond-shaped pattern theme across the ceilings and walls while also cleaning up some of the mess I made by pasting in all the domed sections. Here I make some raised portions of the temple with staircases to make them all accessible. I make some columns to support the side sections as well. I work my way down to the lower levels of the temple, creating this octagonal overhang. The specific angles I used here will be useful for the rest of the temples. Here I'm already using these angles again to create these star points around the base of the temple. I didn't really think I wanted to do a ton of texturing here, but I decided to give the domes a quick noise pattern, as well as some grass. I will also add some palm trees to the outer platforms. Now it's time for the water temple. Like the other temples, I didn't have a super in-depth plan as to how I would carry out this structure. I started by making the largest dome out of all the temples using a hollow sphere. I then made this ring of icy archways to give it some support. Next I work on the columns. I initially wanted to make the columns have a Corinthian look to them with sea foam, but I didn't really like the way it looked, so I settled for a more streamlined design. I also changed the colors to cool stone with icy veins. I make this ring that orbits around the edge of the temple. The ring will connect to 4 towers, one in each cardinal direction. It was at this point that I realized that the giant spherical dome was looking sort of basic, so I decided to make this diagonal mesh-like pattern around the dome before giving it some texturing. After fiddling around with the tower, I remembered I had built something before that could be useful here. One of my previous gods, Nikala, had these 2 vases. Vases? Tomato. Anyways, in that build they were vessels that poured down streams of water from the tops of their towers, so I thought I might reuse this idea here as well. Now I still felt this temple needed some more water features, so I decided to make this ring-shaped aqueduct around the temple. I designed a second one to go around the bottom, but decided that, like the extra towers in the fire temple, it would result in the temple becoming a little bit too bulky. I also ran into the issue of the entryway because one of the water streams is pouring directly onto it. To solve this issue, I made an archway to float above the entrance that would act as an extension of the aqueduct. I'm gonna tell you all a secret now, but you can't go around spreading it. Got it? Okay. Well, the secret is that I actually forgot to do this bottom part of the temple until after I started the air temple, but I just switched the footage to make it seem in order. Last but certainly not least, we have the air temple. I knew going into this one that I wanted to have a lot of floating towers, somewhat like the fire temple. Other than that though, I was still very unsure of how I wanted the temple to look. Because I opted for this temple's unique dome design to be onion-style domes, they started to remind me of the swirly domes on some Russian buildings such as St. Basil's Cathedral. Even though these builds are mostly West Asia inspired, I think a hint of other Asian styles such as North Asian won't clash too much with my vision. Something I was trying to figure out was how I can make the shape of the temple represent air in a similar manner to how the other temples represented their elements. Part of the issue was I wanted this temple to be symmetrical like the others, but also free-flowing like the element of air. My solution to this was to have the smaller towers spiral off the central tower as if they were spinning around it. I will say that after executing this idea, I was really happy with the result. Now I add some details such as crystalline spires on the domes and floating platforms between the towers to give a little bit of continuity across the structure. I finished the air temple by texturing the swirly domes with some light blue and lavenderish tones. After finishing the temples, the last thing I have to do is finish up the central platform. I make some floating staircases to make the levels accessible by foot, as well as some gradients to help indicate the areas where the knotwork overlaps itself. Now I build the classic Jinn trope, the magical lamp. Perhaps if someone were to find Zolazzar's lamp, it could enable his return to the world of Azarin. Finally, I thought I would build one more star symbol at the bottom of the platform with the colors of each of the elements. And with that done, the build is now complete. Hey, look at you, you made it to the end of the video. As usual, I don't yet have a download link to this build, but I'm trying to grow my channel to the point where I would be more comfortable making my builds available, So if you like this build, please like, comment, subscribe, and all that YouTube stuff. With that said, I'll see you in the next time lapse. Bye.